So confusion often plagued the disciples, others who followed Jesus, the Pharisees, and really anyone that he spoke to. I find it very odd that he had such a holy, divine purpose, and yet so many people became confused and mystified by the things that he did and said and how he behaved. And in the latter half of John chapter 6, Jesus tries to explain himself to those who have followed him all the way from the feeding of the 5,000 now across the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum. He tries to tell them that there is a difference between the manna that their ancestors ate in the wilderness and the bread, the life that can come from him, that he can give to them. And it's confusing. He is speaking, they think, about consuming his literal body. And while he's not talking about bread, he's not talking about flour and water and yeast, he is talking about consuming him. And let me tell you, faith is confusing like that. It can be difficult to believe in a God who seems so distant sometimes, and yet so close at hand too, like a breath. It can be difficult to understand how we are to consume and get this life within us. Can it be as simple as consuming bread and drinking wine? Can it be as simple as taking Holy Communion? In this part of John's Gospel, Jesus introduces his followers to a profound new concept: flesh. Flesh. He keeps saying that again and again and again. And flesh is a word that I think conceptually might be a bit lost on us today. Flesh doesn't sound pleasant. It sounds like something that we might think of in a horror movie. In fact, I think it sounds a bit repugnant. And to complicate things, the Jewish Torah forbids the eating of anything with blood in it. So to these Jewish people to whom he spoke, the idea of eating flesh, drinking blood, would have been a forbidden concept to them of what they were allowed to eat. And while Jesus seems to have to be a bit indirect in his teaching to them, his point will be made clear. His flesh, his blood will be given for them in death in order to give life. And again, I think that too is a confusing paradox of faith. Death can lead to life. How can that be? Now, the confusion might still set in for us as it did for those people in a synagogue in Capernaum, because I think for us, we think too, why is Jesus going to do this? Why does he have to do this? Well, this is an act of sacrificial love from the one who loves us, who loves humanity, who is devoted to us, is devoted to saving us from sin and death. And in this sacrificial act, we can come to see God as our advocate, someone abiding with us in the turmoil and darkness of life. But even if we can begin to see God as an advocate who has endured the same pains and hurts and trials that we have, we still might have some difficult questions. I know I do. God became flesh and allowed himself to die. How can a divine being, God, how can the infinite become finite and become human and die? What does it say about God to suffer and die? And is God as powerful as we think if God can suffer and die? And why does God even allow pain and sadness and death? These are the kind of questions that confused his disciples, and they confuse us too. We all know the saying, actions speak louder than words. Well, Jesus, he lived into that. He did many things in his life on earth. He acted, he showed tangible love. He taught people, yes, but he fed people. He healed people. He restored people back to community. He valued people and gave them dignity and worth when everything around them tried to make them feel like nothing less than human. But all of those were acts of a limited compassion. They might help someone with an immediate need. They might feed someone for a day. They might heal someone for a season, but that wouldn't be a permanent thing. But to know that someone truly loves you, that someone truly values you, that takes, I think, a unique action. That takes a unique act of love and devotion. God became flesh to be in solidarity with humanity. God became flesh to live among humanity, to become one with humanity, and to physically show tangible love to all people. But if I'm to feel sustained and filled with this food, this bread of life, then I have to know that God is truly with me, that God is truly for me, and that God truly does know everything that I feel. There are very few people in the world who have a way to show you the kind of love and devotion that your soul needs. And in this, we find a very exclusive claim about God and a very inclusive claim too. The only way, we are told in the Bible, the only way to truly find life is to allow Jesus' body and blood to somehow enter into us. Now, that would be an exclusive claim. The only way to find life is to allow Jesus' body and blood to enter into us. But this body and blood is limited to no one. And that would be a very inclusive claim of the faith that we share. It can often be hard to put one's trust out there in the world. You might be let down. Life can be tough and it can be confusing. It is tough to be vulnerable. And Jesus adds to this confusion with his own followers because it goes against our human natural inclination to believe that someone, anyone, might stand with us through everything that we face in life. It goes against our human natural inclination and becomes almost impossible to believe that someone, anyone, might love us enough even to die for us. It's like we've all been conditioned to think that we might never truly find everything that we need in life. And we endlessly seek out things to fill that void. We've been conditioned to think that no one can truly know us intimately, to know every flaw, to know every ugly thing about us, much less empathize with us, much less love us unconditionally in spite of us. We've been conditioned to think that way, that there isn't anyone who would stand by us and love us through everything in life. But Jesus is not talking about filling us with food, with bread. He is speaking about God's ability to fill in every void that we have, to fill us with something that is accepting, that is fully loving, that is forgiving, that will sustain when we think that everything else in the world is letting us down. For Jesus to say, "This is my flesh, my body, given for you," that is a very bold thing to say. It's an acknowledgement that God came to live with and among humanity, and that this messy, broken world in which we live is the very place that God chose to set up camp and to be with us and to meet us. I think that Jesus used every possible metaphor that he could think of, an image, to relate his sacrificial love for the world. Bread, water, life. And when he says that he is the bread from heaven, that they are to eat and to drink, he was speaking to a people who knew daily food insecurity, who knew what it felt like to be vulnerable, who knew what it felt like to be alone and empty. He was speaking to people who longed to be filled with something more than a daily need. And he was saying, I can fill you, and I will fill you. He wanted them to know a fulfillment that went beyond shelter and food and clothing and even their own families. Can we too think beyond the bounds of what we know and believe about God? Can God be for you an advocate, a comfort, a guide, a companion? Can God be for you food, bread, water, forgiveness, and life? When you come up today to take Holy Communion, my hope is that you'll see this sacrament anew, that in it you'll believe that you are consuming not only bread and wine, but that you are consuming the sacrificial love of God that can fill you when life and the world cannot. I want you to believe that you will be consuming the sacrificial love of God that will fill you when life and the world cannot. And I believe that all we need and all we have is empty hands that need to be filled, an empty heart that needs to be healed, and an empty soul that can be forgiven and loved. Amen.